So welcome to show 4 of the Spen Nick Show. We're super excited again to be here and just having a chat with you about all the things that are kind of going on in our lives and hopefully some interesting concepts that you're going to be able to apply to your everyday life, whether that be in work or play or relationships or whatever it is. Some of these concepts, I think, cross over into a load of different areas. So again, Himo's with me.
Hey, hello everyone.
How you doing, Himo?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. I'm really excited because I think we've done a lot of work with last week's episode that I think is really exciting, and I want to share with people what we've done.
Mate, I think it was incredible what you did and turned around in such a quick time. So I know you've kind of explained a little bit of those things to me really briefly, but I think it'd be fascinating to share with people how you can take little snippets of content and turn it into a whole load of media that you can share really well. So tell us that process. Tell us what happened with that.
Yeah, what this was about really was creating your own little media company, isn't it, Spencer? So taking what was 20 minutes of a conversation between the two of us and creating lots of micro bits of content that we can share in lots of other different ways, but also doing it in a way that's really effortless, or it takes the minimum amount of effort and time possible, because no one's got time for that, to be spending hours like creating blogs and days creating blogs and creating little video, micro bits of video. What we want to do is do everything that we can as quickly and as efficiently as possible to get the most powerful result in terms of the quality and the quantity of content that we're producing. So the process that I went through last week was that I took the audio, I actually took the whole video, the YouTube video link, and I pasted it in Rev.com's automated transcription platform, and within 5 minutes I got the transcription, and then with that transcription it was about 80% there. There was quite a lot of ums and ahs in it that I didn't want to have in there, so I managed to get rid of those automatically just by clicking a button, and then what I did was I went through the document, made some changes where I thought were necessary, and then actually I just copied and pasted that into a Google document. In that Google document, I then went, well, what are the main chunks of conversation? Split those chunks into three. Well, there was 3 main chunks, gave each chunk a heading or a title, and then I took out the gold, rephrased stuff, put in stuff that I felt was missing, chopped out a lot, and gave it an ending with links saying, if you like this post, check out the full video. And so it goes back to the original YouTube video that it came from. And now we've got 3 blogs that probably took me, 2 of them took me probably about half an hour to chop out really quickly. I think it's much easier to write for someone else than it is to write for yourself. When you write for yourself, you put the handbrake on much more than when you do it for someone else, which means that you can get the results much quicker for other people. And I think that's why I was able to produce 2 blog posts for you in the same amount of time that I did one for me, even though last week's conversation, the bit that I was writing for myself was a bigger chunk.
Yeah, and it was amazing. From my perspective, it was awesome because, but actually it felt a bit weird because it felt like I was publishing blogs that I hadn't actually typed out, even though it was all my words. It was what we captured during our podcast last week. It felt kind of weird that I was putting something out that I hadn't touched. And then it kind of occurred to me that this happens all the time, right? There were so many blogs that are written on other people's behalves, and there were always kind of ghost writers to books and all of those. There's that whole machinery that happens behind a lot of this media that's created. So, but the other thing, on the flip side of that, it was incredible that you were able to take a bunch of stuff that I had said, not necessarily randomly, it was all carefully thought out, but it wasn't necessarily planned in the level of detail that I go into when I write a blog. And one single blog post for me can take hours and hours because, like you say, you keep hitting these barriers and these blockers and you kind of block yourself. You self-impose some of these blocks because you're trying to kind of craft this complex story sometimes and complex narrative. But actually I found that by doing it this way, you're able to not just be really quick, but actually get the core message out really, really easily. And I've had some amazing reactions already from the blogs that I put on, and I just posted them onto my own blog, my own site, but kind of reposted into LinkedIn and stuff. And I think there's been amazing response to it. And doing it that quickly is so helpful. I think for me, one of the big things about doing it quickly and doing it efficiently is that this stuff is hard to get into the habit of doing regularly if it's really hard, if it takes a lot of time. But what you really need to be doing is shipping as quickly as possible, getting it out there into the world, and then moving on to the next thing as quickly as possible. Getting into that habit continuously of producing content is what this is all about. So for me, like dwelling on some of these things, and I've got like 25 blog posts that are half written that I've not shared yet, because like of that constant fear. But actually, this is an amazing way to do it. So I think we should totally do this more and more.
Definitely. And just one other thing that I did was, from those blog posts that came out of it, I took chunks, or like small chunks from it, and then posted one of them myself on LinkedIn as a little status update type thing. And also, I think you did the same.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
also is a great way to get people excited about the content. And I think LinkedIn's algorithm is really liking those kind of long form, but as long as they can be, I think it's up to like 1,200 characters status updates. So those seem to be going down better even than videos at the moment.
Yeah, really interesting. I know that we were talking earlier about Instagram algorithm as well. It seems to be prioritizing images over video at the moment. So I think, one of the really interesting things I think we could do is start to craft some of those blogs maybe into Instagram carousels as well. Again, I often take a lot of time with Instagram carousels because I'm really looking at the design and trying to weave a complex narrative, but actually trying to simplify it as much as possible, I think, is the really key thing. So I think that's absolutely what we should do over the next week or so, is trying to get as much content out from this as we possibly can.
So I think this week we penciled in that we wanted to talk about jobs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think jobs to be done is a fascinating framework. Actually, even more than a framework, it's more becoming more of a mindset for me. Again, it's something that I think about all the time, not just with building products and marketing products, but actually in loads of different aspects of my life. Really trying to understand what that key job or key problem is that we're trying to solve. So I'll just quickly, if that's okay, kind of fly over the very top level of what jobs to be done framework is all about. And then I'd love to kind of explore some different concepts and maybe case studies with you as well. So for me, like, the jobs theory all comes out of the notion that people buy something in order to get a job done, in order to solve a problem. And this kind of strange terminology of jobs and kind of getting them done. And if you go into it, it talks about hiring. But essentially, it's all about solving people's problems. And in order to solve a problem, a person has to be able to make progress against that problem. If they're not making progress against a problem that they have, then they're not going to continue to buy that product. Now, there's a really famous example, which I'll really talk very quickly about, which is, I think it was Theodore Levitt came up with this idea, or this quote, which is that people don't want to buy a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. And I guess in UK metric versions, that would be like a 6mm drill bit or whatever. So really what this is all about is kind of, people don't really want to buy that piece of hardware that makes a hole. What they really want to buy is the hole. Now, that's really fine. I totally get that, and that makes sense. But actually, you can go much deeper into the jobs to be done as well that people really, really want. So why do you want a hole? If you start to explore why you want a hole, then actually you get to a different problem that people are trying to solve. In a business context, for example, if it's an office, you might want a hole so that you can hang a picture that makes your office look more professional. If it looks more professional, then it might feel to your clients that it's a place that is trustworthy, and therefore to your clients feeling like it's a trustworthy place and it's a professional place, that actually they might end up buying more from you, and because you've got this kind of nice, trustworthy office space. So actually buying a 1/4-inch drill or a 6mm drill bit is all about creating the space and the environment that you're kind of looking for. Now, those levels of kind of abstraction, if you like, are really important to consider. But I think one of the things that I'm learning more about jobs framework is that you need to come in as a business, you need to come into that level, that right level of abstraction for you. If you're a company that sells drills, you don't necessarily want to be talking about creating the perfect office space, although that might work in marketing, but it might not give you the right kind of innovation tool set. So I think figuring out what the job is that people are trying to solve and how you can enable them to make progress against that job is a really important thing, but also trying to figure out what that level of kind of abstraction of the depth of the job that you're looking to kind of achieve as well. So trying to be as quick on that kind of explanation as possible. One of the key things for me about jobs to be done is that a lot of people get it wrong. A lot of people think when they hear jobs to be done, they think of it as a task list or as a kind of, a way to just, or a way to kind of talk about what people do in their everyday everyday world, but it's really not about that. It's really about trying to solve basic problems, right?
Absolutely. I think you've done a really good job of summarising there in a short amount of time as well there, Spencer. Something that I really wanted to share was probably one of the most famous jobs to be done case studies, which is McDonald's.
Mm-hmm.
So McDonald's really wanted to increase revenues of their milkshakes. And so what they did was the classic thing, which was go and speak to their customers, which is brilliant. They went and spoke to their customers. The customers gave them some fantastic feedback, and McDonald's implemented it perfectly. And do you know what happened, Spencer?
What happened?
Sales of milkshakes stayed the same. They didn't go up, they didn't go down, they went roughly the same. And so McDonald's started scratching their head and saying, well, what's going on? We've asked our customers what they wanted, we've done it, and it's made no difference to sales. So it was at this point that they brought in Clayton Christensen. And of course, Clayton Christensen said that customers hire products to get a job done in their life. Right. And so what McDonald's needed to do was ask the question, what job are our customers hiring milkshakes for in their lives? And so what he did was he went to the McDonald's restaurants, the fast food restaurants, and he spoke to customers. But more importantly than that, he also observed them and looked at what they were actually doing, their behavior. And from it, he realized that most customers were coming in before about 8:30 in the morning to come and get their milkshakes. They were coming in on their own. The milkshake was the only thing they bought, and they usually picked it up and took it away with them to have in their car. Because what they were doing was they were often commuting to work. Roughly about 20 minutes was the average that he said, that he found out. And that while they were driving, they'd be having their milkshake in one hand, just because it was a really boring commute and they just wanted to have something to do. And it was easy to drink, easy to consume. Also, it was good because it kind of lasted the whole 20-minute journey. And they didn't want to be too full. They just wanted something to fill them up a little bit because they're probably going to have something to eat at work as well when they got there. So they wanted something just viscous enough just to keep them going. And so from that, he realised that the jobs to be done of customers were to be entertained, be interested in their commute, have something interesting to do while they're driving. 2, have something that lasts the whole 20-minute journey. And 3, have something that's viscous enough that they're going to be able to kind of keep going until when they get to work. And so from that understanding, it was really interesting because what he realised was that McDonald's main competitors weren't actually Burger King's milkshakes. They were in fact quite different things. It was actually more like donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, and bananas, because those were all things that you could eat in one hand as you were going to work. And so with this understanding, they made some changes again to the milkshakes. What they did was they put some fruit chunks into the milkshake, which meant that it was a little bit unusual, a little bit different, a little bit interesting when you were kind of like sipping them on your way to work. It was like, oh, what's that? That's a little bit different. And then what they did was they made the shake a little bit thicker, which meant that it was a little bit more viscous, which meant that it kept you a little bit fuller until you got to work. And also, they made the straw a little bit thinner, which meant that it took a little bit longer to drink the milkshake, which meant that it lasted the whole 20-minute commute to work. Once they'd implemented these changes, they then looked at the sales figures. And you know what? Sales went through the roof, dramatically increased.
Wow.
And McDonald's was absolutely over the moon. So the key lesson here is you need to understand what the jobs to be done of your customers are. It's not enough just to ask them. You've got to observe them and really know what they're doing, because what customers say and what customers do are not always the same thing.
Amazing, and I think there's so many lessons that we can take from that. One very quick one. It really reminds me of the quote that apparently Henry Ford said about if we asked customers what they want, they would have said a faster horse, and of course we gave them a motor car. And I think that's a lesson that we should always be wary of and think carefully of about when we're trying to solve and try to figure out solve people's problems, but also figure out what potential products we could unleash into the market. I think the other thing is that strikes me about that that thing that right at the end there is about this idea of competition. And often you think of your direct competitors as being the people that do something very similar or the same as you. And actually, competition can strike across loads of different domains and from all over the different kind of areas, different products, because the competition is about the job that you're trying to do, not about the actual product itself. And I think that's a really important takeaway that we should all try to think about much more. What are the divergent competitors for what we're trying to solve and the progress that we're trying to get people to make against their jobs and their problems? That's a really, really big challenge, I think. And it could mean that your competitor list gets really, really big. But it's definitely something we should be thinking about more.
Can I just jump back to your Henry Ford quote as well?
Yeah, please, yeah.
There's this idea that I think design thinking has become so popular recently, whereby we really need to understand our customers at the beginning. We need to understand what their jobs to be done are. We need to understand the customer profile fully as much as possible before we start creating products and services. But I think that we've almost gone too far, because before we probably weren't doing that enough. You know, it comes back from the industrial age where you have a factory, you build some pins, and then you go, well, let's find some people to sell these pins to. Mm-hmm. Rather than saying, well, actually, let's find a customer, find out what their needs are, and then create a product that really suits their needs. I think we've almost gone too far the other way now, where we're focusing so much at the beginning on the customer's needs that we're kind of disregarding some of the inherent strengths that we have as organizations, which are also really valuable. And this is where the Alex Osterwalder quote comes in that I absolutely love, which is that innovation doesn't have to start with the customer, but it always has to finish with the customer. So
nice. Yeah.
What you can do is you can think about, okay, so like if you're an existing company, you've got lots of great technology, it would be silly to disregard that technology as part of the innovation process. Why not look at the technology or your processes or other strengths that you have as a business? Think about those and think about how you can use those to satisfy your customers. And then really think about, is it working? Is it something that's really right for your customer? And what changes can you make to make it perfect for the customer? So therefore, you don't start off with the customer in that way for that type of innovation process, but you certainly finish with the customer to make sure it's something that absolutely suits their needs.
And I think that comes back to that point I was making about the levels of abstraction of the depth that you go into on the job to be done. So if you come back to that drill example, if you're a manufacturer of drill bits, but you suddenly realise that actually people can put a poster or a picture up on the wall without having to make a hole, then that kind of goes against your whole business model and the thing that you've been really specialist at for a long time. So I think it's about finding that point with the job story that you can have an impact and actually do something in order to make progress against that job. If you got down to like first principle problems for everyone, then actually you wouldn't be making some of the higher level products that sit in some of those higher levels of abstraction for people, and actually you would have a much harder time of making any progress or enabling anybody to make any progress and yourself making any money. So I think you're absolutely right. You've got to take those things into consideration, which are both what's the unfair advantage that you have? What position, market position or technology position or people position do you have that nobody else has? But then you've got to be taking into consideration the user needs as well. And I think that's really amazing. Like that thought of ending with the user problems being kind of flipping a lot of like that traditional sense of design thinking on its head a little bit. So I think it's great. One of the things I'd like to question you on actually is this idea, and this is really well demonstrated with what you talked about a minute ago with McDonald's, that everyone has a problem, everyone has a job that they need that they need doing, and there's an argument. And I was reading the book when Coffee Competes with Kale, I think it's called, by Alan Clement, and I was reading this book, and he is against a number of things that Clayton Christensen talks about, which is this idea that you can have both jobs to be done as a framework and disruptive innovation as a framework, because actually those two things kind of compete, certainly on some domains. Now, really quickly, the idea of disruptive innovation is that it's a new innovation which comes in often at an underserved market or with a new paradigm, a new audience or a new sector that haven't been exposed to this kind of product or this service before. But I think the difficulty that I have with reconciling these two things is that jobs to be done assumes that there is always an answer to a problem. There is always someone that's solving that problem. And if you have a problem, you've already solved it in some way. It might not be an adequate solution. It might not be the best solution. It might be a solution actually that you've hacked together something in order to solve that problem for yourself. But it doesn't hold true that you can be in a non-consumption. You can have non-consumption over a problem and have had that problem solved through jobs to be done. I'm probably not articulating that question that well, but I'm really interested to understand whether you've got any thoughts on that, on reconciling the kind of disruptive innovation and jobs to be done frameworks together.
I think that's a fantastic question. I think there are definitely examples of times in my life, though, where I've had certain jobs to be done, and I've not actually had anything to do them yet. There might have been products out there that could help me, but I still had that job to be done, and it was still, I hadn't adopted the solution yet. So I don't know what does the jobs to be done theory say in that context? I don't know about that.
Well, I think the theory with that context would be if you haven't solved it, then it's not a real job. So if
what if you just haven't been to Tesco yet to pick up that solution yet to find it? Or you know what the solution exists, but you just haven't picked it up yet.
Well, I think that's just about timing of your consumption over whether or not you've solved the job necessarily. I think the fact that it exists and it's there means that you've got that opportunity. But I think where there's, and I think it's quite a hard example. Actually, one of the examples that they give in the book is from an example in India, where actually Clayton Christensen was brought in to help create a new low-cost fridge. And the idea behind this was super low cost, so that loads of families poor families in India would be able to keep a lot of their produce fresh for longer. And the assumption was they don't have a fridge, therefore they're non-consumption. There's no non-consumption. They are an underserved market that don't have the ability to afford a fridge. So therefore, if we create a super low-cost fridge that's low cost to run, it's low cost to buy, then the idea is that millions of people across India would buy that. Now, the difficulty that they found was just because they didn't have a fridge didn't mean that their jobs weren't being done, that they hadn't satisfied problems that they already had. So what people were doing and what they actually found out was, because when they launched this fridge, by the way, it completely flopped and they hardly sold anything. And they had huge investment into the area and into the production of this low-cost fridge. The reasons were that it didn't solve the job in as big a way as some of the other solutions that they had already found. So what people would do would be dig a hole in the ground and put some fresh produce in the ground because it was cooler in the ground rather than in the midday sun. They'd also find that they just went to the shop every day instead of every few days, so they didn't have the need to constantly buy fresh produce. And some of that is about habit changing. Changing people's behaviours and enabling people to not have to go to the market or to the shop every day. But they just didn't need that. It just wasn't a job for them. They already had solutions to it. They would cook fresh food. They would preserve certain foods, and so there just wasn't the need for a fridge, and so it just completely flopped. And I think that's kind of an interesting example, that the assumption was that there was an underserved market because there wasn't a fridge, but actually the reality was people were cooling their food in different ways and didn't have a need for a fridge in the first place, so therefore it flopped.
It's funny that you bring up this India example, because I've just been rereading The Lean Startup now after quite a while.
Great.
And they give the example for how what they were doing was they were trying to offer a new washing machine service to kind of underserved markets in India as well, whereby people were paying someone to take their clothes to the river, wash them in the river, bash them against a tree, and then hang them out to dry. And typically it took 10 days for them to get their laundry back. So what they did was they went to India, brought a just like this van basically, or I think it was like a kiosk type thing, and they put one high quality washing machine in there, and they were able to do a turnaround in around 24 hours. But what they did was they only got one of them just to test the concept, to see if people would actually come and pay them money to get their washing done. And they did. And then they started doing extra tests. They said, well, will people pay extra to get it done in 4 hours rather than 24 hours? And they did. And so it was really a useful experiment to be able to validate that people want that type of service and they're willing to pay for it. And I think that has massive implications for how we kind of can save money and time and not kind of create new products and services that nobody wants, and was an excellent way of going about launching an offering that was available in other countries but in a new market in India. So it just reminded me of that, and I thought that was a really good story.
I think that's such a good thing. And I think one of the things we have to constantly bear in mind is there's a lot of different frameworks, different processes, different methodologies and approaches that actually all kind of need to come together and weave around each other. It's not that you just do design thinking, or you just follow jobs to be done theory, or you just do lean, or you just do agile. It's about how do these things interweave and connect with each other in order to keep testing and keep learning, in order to build products as quickly, as efficiently as possible, in order to make sure that you've got the customer at the end of each of those processes, so that you're making sure that you're building something that is needed, that is solving a real problem, that you're testing and learning continuously, that you're running experiments, and all of those things actually have to come together to form a kind of a constant web, if you like, of different approaches. And I think that when you go down the path of just relying too heavily on one, and I think in that example that I gave you, Christensen was probably writing about disruption theory at that time, so that's the thing that was so far in his mind, and therefore perhaps forgetting some of those other elements that are so important to be able to bring in, such as lean methodology, lean startup. So that combination of all these things weaving around each other is absolutely what we need to do. And it's not that one is the golden or the silver bullet. Actually, all of them are really important when we're thinking about, building products and solving problems for people.
Definitely, because the way that I see it is when I'm cooking a meal, I've got lots of different knives, lots of different spatulas. I'm using different peelers and all these different tools that I'm using to create a meal. But I don't always use the right tool for the job. Sometimes I use a spoon when I should be using a spatula. Sometimes I use a knife when I should be using a fork to flip over a steak or something, something like that, or even a spatula. So I think that relates totally to this kind of example where there are lots of different theories out there, and we've got them all in our toolbox, and it's about applying them. Finding ways to apply them. We might not always use them in the right place at the right time, but if we can, it's about using them to get the result that we want. And I think that with all of them, there are so many of them out there now that we're in a really lucky place that we can make innovation happen, and we can do it. It might not be perfect every time, but we can use these tools to help us get a result.
And hopefully it's not perfect every time, so that you've got something to learn from. Actually, on the kitchen appliances thing, you're absolutely right. You can totally cook with just a knife, right? So you could just use one tool for everything. But actually, if you want to cook the best meal that you can, if you want it to be an efficient process and you're good at it, not just in terms of the quality at the end, but actually you're doing it and you're happy and you're enjoying the process of doing it, then some of these other implements and tools actually really work. So sure, you can use one tool at any time, but actually if you want to make the best out of something, then using as many as you can, or as many that are fit for the job as you can, is absolutely the right thing.
And I just want to go back to your idea around making mistakes as well, because it reminds me of the story of Ian Pace. He was the drummer from Deep Purple, and every night he used to do a drum solo at every concert they used to play. And every night he'd do a different drum solo, and he was playing by the seat of his pants. Or is that the expression? I hope it's right.
I think it'll work.
I've been saying it a lot now, so hopefully it works. So he used to do a different drum solo every night, and with that drum solo, he would do crazy speedy things. He'd be going all over the drum kit, and he was so close to making mistakes every night. And then sometimes it would be just a massive, terrible, horrible drum solo. But other days he'd do something that he didn't mean to do, and that mistake would be so nice that he'd just find ways to work it in more regularly into his drum solo. And it's through these mistakes that we can actually get to new ideas, new concepts that can make us much better in our work, much better innovators. And so I think that's really important to embrace making those mistakes, not being scared, because at the end of the day, a lot of time, what's the worst thing that happens if we do make a mistake? Not a lot. So why not go out there, try those new things, and from that, amazing things can happen.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And do you know what? I think that's an amazing place for us to stop this podcast. Incredible conversation again. I think, I've been kind of grappling with some of these concepts for a while. It's amazing to be able to talk to you about them in detail, because you always are able to kind of throw in something additional to my thinking. So it's a real pleasure and real joy. I hope that if there are any people listening, that they kind of get some of that, get that sense as well of us kind of constantly exploring and pushing each other in order to get the best out of what we're trying to achieve. So yeah, fantastic, lovely conversation as always, Nick.
Thanks so much. I love these conversations, Spencer. So this has been absolutely brilliant, and I can't wait until next week.
Cool. Let's leave it there, and we will see you next time.